This is Larry Clinton with the Floating Homes Association. I'm sitting down with Ron Moreland, who's one of the longest-term residents of Kappa's Marina. So Ron, I'm curious about how you came to discover the floating home community.
Basically, a friend of ours rented the boat number 1 here on East Pier, and we came over to visit him and walked down the pier. There was very few boats here at the time, but this boat was here, and it happened to be the realtor was on board showing it to somebody. And so we walked in and looked around, and a few weeks later bought it.
And what was the attraction that brought you here?
The price. It was we couldn't afford a house anywhere else in the Bay Area without going, almost to Sacramento. And so we got this house for $30,000, which back in 1975 was a lot of money to us, but this community was, for the most part, low and moderate income people back then, and it was an affordable place to live in Marin County.
And this house was much smaller then?
Yes. We added the concrete hull and added another 1,000 square feet downstairs onto this house over the, 7 or 8 years after we bought it.
It's always fascinated me that that's how floating homes tend to grow, from the bottom up. You put the barge in, and that gives you an extra, if you have the height limits in place and everything.
Yeah, you add a basement is basically what you're doing, which is kind of interesting for people. When they think of expanding, you don't think of adding a basement, but that's basically what we're doing.
Yeah. So then, in a little more detail, how has your home changed over all these years?
Well, we've just done massive remodeling. There's no window or wall inside or out that's original. I think we're on our 3rd kitchen remodel, 3rd or 4th, and but kind of be expected. We've been here, 41 years and counting. So it's a lot of things changed during that kind of time period.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced living here? Did you have leaks anytime, sinkage or any?
Not directly, although what triggered us to put the barge on here, the concrete barge, was we floated on 3 fiberglass pontoons, and one of them sprung a small leak. And although we fixed it, we started freaking out, thinking about, well, what happens when there's more? And so at that point, we got serious about putting the barge on. And we also just needed more space.
So how do you feel the community has changed in those 41 years that you lived here?
Well, it's changed radically as far as the people is concerned, the floating homes, the quality of them, that kind of stuff. Around here, it's a constant, you see upgrades and whatnot, people fixing up their houses all the time. The community was far younger. I don't know what an average age would have been, but it was 20 or 30 years younger than we are our average age now. Of course, I was 24 years old when we moved on here. So, the people that lived here, we always kind of wondered what they did for a living, just because Kathy and I were the only 2 people heading down the dock in the morning going to work. That, of course, changed over time, where you'd see a thundering herd of people heading down the dock going to work, but back in the late 70s and early 80s, it was very different.
And you were one of the early founders of the Floating Homes Association. Can you tell us the story of how the FHA was formed?
Yeah, back in the early 80s, I believe it was, a law was changed which precluded the DMV, which was registering floating homes and providing titles to them, precluded them from doing that anymore. And all of a sudden we were sitting here in limbo, unable to transfer title or do anything with your floating home. So the FHA everybody got together on an emergency basis and formed the FHA to basically get a bill passed through the legislature and signed by the governor, changing that. And that was the first of many bills the FHA sponsored through the legislature.
What do you think have been the Floating Homes Association's other major accomplishments in those 40-some years?
Well, there's been a lot. We've gotten at least, I can think of, 5 or 6 bills through the legislature, which is, for a small little several hundred member organization, getting something passed through the California legislature and whatnot has been I think, quite an accomplishment for us. Among things that we got passed was the floating home residency law, which provided a whole lot of protections for the tenants, for the homeowners, basically here, with regard to the marina, and it changed things radically with regard to the relationship between the homeowners and the marina, and the fact that a lot of the provisions that are in the floating home residency law are now basically built into the leases. So, I mean, there's been, a lot of things. I mean, I could go on forever talking about a lot of the things, but just as something that pops into my mind now, there was a time when you dialed 911, when people use landlines anyway, and they did not know where you were. What showed up at the Marin County Civic Center was an address that had something to do with the underwater streets here. And so in an emergency, that was something important. So that's one thing that the FHA changed. So now if you dial 911 from your landline, it tells exactly the right address. But as I say, that's just one of many things that the FHA has been involved with over the years that's made life a whole lot better down here.
It also seems to me that the houseboat community, which is what we used to be called before we became a floating homes community, really suffered from some image problems that were perhaps holdovers from the houseboat wars of the mid-'70s. Did those houseboat wars affect Kappa's Marina much?
No, not really, not on a direct basis. There was actually some of the floating homes here at Kappa's that moved to Waldo as they built the docks and whatnot, just because they thought they would be a better dock to live on than here. But it wasn't a direct thing, but Kathy, my wife, and I, when we got off the bus in the evening, we would see all the commotion and whatnot going on. So we were
police activity?
Yeah, the police activity and stuff. So we were well aware of it, although a lot of it happened during the day when we were at work. But it certainly was something we were aware of, but not directly involved with it because we're sitting over here at Kappa's.
So the governing body, or one of the governing bodies with jurisdiction over this place, is the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And the Floating Homes Association has had maybe a rocky relationship with them. I wonder if you'd care to just explain a little of how that has evolved.
Well, the BCDC originally, I think, felt that we were a nuisance that should be gotten rid of. And their best case scenario was all of the floating homes abated and this just become open water. They feel that residential use of the bay is not a permitted activity, and we are residential use of the bay. But thanks to the efforts of the FHA, that has become a moot issue entirely. They know the writings on the wall. We're never going anywhere. They would never have the ability to try to force that to happen. And that's because of a whole series of things of FHA members showing up meetings, lobbying BCDC commissioners. I mean, it's been a long thing over 20, 30 years, actually, we've been dealing with the BCDC on various issues. And so now it's, we're permanently here and they know it. And, but there was a time when there was a possibility that they would make an effort to get rid of us.
How do you feel about the role of the Floating Homes Tour in changing perceptions about the community?
Well, I think the tour has been a wonderful PR tool for our community. It's brought a lot of people in here who have totally misperceptions of what we are, and changed it. So that's one of the reasons why BCDCs had to back off, because they realized that we're a permanent part of the community now, and so there's we're not going anywhere. And I think it's helped with the values of the floating homes. For if you own a home, you're glad the values have skyrocketed. I guess other people could have different issues with the fact that we are no longer a low or moderate income community. There's not a whole lot of savings buying here versus buying on land. But, and I think the tours had a lot to do with that, because of it really helped our image.
Have the FHA had any failures that you consider, in your mind, noteworthy?
I would say our biggest failure was the inability to pass rent control. We came within a hair's breadth.
Could you elaborate on that story?
Yeah, basically, the floating homes in Seattle got passed a rent control ordinance, which totally changed the whole character of the community because of that, to the betterment as far as the homeowners were concerned. So we took that law, made some modifications to it, and presented it to the Board of Supervisors, Marin County Board of Supervisors. And we actually had 3 of the 5 supervisors signed up to pass it. We had 4 extremely panicked marina owners sitting across the table begging almost us to back off, and because up until that point they'd refused to agree to long-term leases or anything else like that. They just basically said screw you, and they were begging us, and we were ignoring them, and in walked a lady from the county council's office and said, you can't pass this because state law precludes you from passing rent control on a commercial property. And if you think about it, the floating home marinas are commercial properties.
They're zoned that way.
Yeah, so it's not a residential property. It's not a residential thing. They're commercial. So at that point, the FHA started lobbying to get the law changed in Sacramento, so the local county supervisors could pass a rent control. Of course, the marina owners fought us tooth and nail over that, and at that point they finally backed off and agreed to the 20-year leases that we have now, and which, as far as I'm concerned, is not as good as rent control, but it's certainly better than what we had before.
Right, because those leases have rent increase formulas that limit what the marinas
Right.
can
And another thing that comes to mind, this goes back to the floating home residency law that the FHA got passed through the legislature. One of the key provisions of that is it precludes you from being evicted. The marina owners cannot evict you as long as you pay your rent. Just as simple as that. The only way they could evict you is if the zoning of this was to change from floating homes to whatever, which is politically never would happen in the county of Marin. So, so for all intents and purposes, if you pay your rent, they can't say, we don't like you anymore, we're going to build our own boat and rent it out and kick you out, which was, before the law was passed, was a real possibility to happen. In fact, I think it did happen a few times where people had to move because the marina owners wanted to put their own floating home in its place.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
But at that time, you had some ability to move over to Waldo Point Harbor, and so all that's precluded now, thanks to the efforts of the FHA and the laws that we've passed through the California legislature.
So in the 41 years that you've lived here, what do you like most about this lifestyle?
It's pretty easy. It's the community. That's the only reason we've been here this long is it's a rural community. We lived in Walnut Creek in an apartment complex when we first got married, and never knew anybody, hardly met anybody, and certainly, that's very different here. And it's the sense of community, people helping people. It's a very different environment than most neighborhoods, so to speak. That's basically what we are, is we're a neighborhood.
I've been struck that people pick up on that immediately after moving here. You know, we don't have a lot of CC&Rs, rules and regulations about that, but it is the hidden surprise of this community. I think people buy here for the convenience of the location, for the water orientation, for the natural beauty, and then they find out that they are plugged into an incredibly close-knit community.
Yeah, I mean, it would be impossible to know that really. I mean, somebody can tell you that, but it kind of goes in one ear and out the other until you actually live here and see neighbors helping neighbors and
Right.
whatnot. You don't have to be friends with everybody, but you know each one. Every time I'm out on the dock, I know whether it's a resident or a tourist. And and that's something that's really changed over the years. Now we're talking about it is tourism. This was never a tourist area at all, and I would say in the last, especially in the last 15 years, that's radically changed. I know, to me, it doesn't bother me at all, but we're a major tourist destination in the worldwide. People know us because you know, the tour buses pull in here in the summertime and disgorge their passengers, and so people of all over the world, we've met them, are up and down these docks, taking pictures and intrigued by our community. And
Sausalito features the floating homes in all of its promotion and graphics and that sort of thing. So if Sausalito has an international reputation, we're actually a major part of that.
yeah, I think so. And certainly, Kathy and I, my wife, we travel all over the world. And surprisingly, when you say Sausalito, a lot of people for an 8,000 person community know what we're talking about. Although we tend to say San Francisco just so there's no confusion. But yeah, it's quite something. I mean, give you an example. A few years ago, a French television documentary crew was coming through here, and they did a short interview of me, and I never thought about it. And then a few years later, Kathy and I are in France, actually in the French Alps, in a small little town. We walk into the hotel we're staying at that evening, and the lady behind the front desk says, "Oh, I just saw you on TV a few weeks ago." And you talk about a small world, okay? I mean, that was, and I'm going, huh? And then I thought about that French crew, and she said it was some sort of you know, travel documentary, and she saw me on TV, so.
So now you're planning to become a landlubber and move to Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to miss most about living here?
The community. Same thing as what we liked best about it. You know, I don't know what it'll be like up there. I'm expecting it to be different, but you know, definitely the thing that's kept us here is, I think, the thing is we're going to miss the most.
And what will you miss the least?
The fog howling through here in the summer, the long walk down the docks in the middle of winter when it's raining and blowing and whatnot. Those are things that I'll miss the least. I mean, if I had a buck for every time I've walked up and down this dock over the last 41 years, I'd be very well off.
And how do you see the future of the floating homes community?
Well, I think it's certainly a bright future. It's as I say, it's radically different. I think it's a more of an upscale community. I enjoy seeing people fixing up their homes and making it a nicer place to live and whatnot. I think that's got a very good future here. I don't see why things would change differently in the coming years.
And it seems to be sort of, to torture a metaphor here, riding the wave of rising to ocean levels and that sort of thing. This is being a lifestyle that's being copied more and more around the world, where they have facing rising ocean levels.
Sure. That's not maybe an issue for our parking lots, but it's certainly not an issue for our homes, for at least for a while anyway.
Any final thoughts other than what we've covered so far?
No, I'm just saying is that I think I made it clear. I think the FHA has been a critical part of making this a great place to live, and I wish it and the community nothing but the best as we get ready to move away. But after 41 years, it's time for us to make a change.
Well, great, Ron. And I might just add that you and Kathy have been very important parts of the community and the Floating Homes Association. We're going to miss you, and we wish you well.
Okay, thanks a lot.